Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Final Trade. We're going to take another look at Magic Standard Expansion Booster Box prices. And so far, I've been doing this once every year. You'll notice November 2nd, 2022, November 9th, 2023, and now November 5th, 2024. Going forward, I plan to do this every 6 months just to get a little more granular look. I'm going to explain what all these data are, how I derive them, and then we'll actually look at them, discuss them, and try and see if we can make any conclusions from them. So what these calculations are is I've taken every standard draft box, regular booster box, going back to October of 2000. And this is when this was the beginning of the era that no longer had reserved lists. So the sets right before this still had some reserve list cards in them. So I've gone from that forward. Now, this is not all Modern Magic. Modern Magic started with 8th edition and Mirrodin in 2003, where pre-modern is this, and then on backwards. So for each of these boxes, back in November of 22, I started tracking what was the price on the day, and this was the lower of either market price or lowest listed on TCG Player. Okay, and the reason that I choose those is if the lower one is the market price, well, those are actual sales. Now, if the current lowest listed box is below the market price, that means the next buyer is getting it below market. And we're wanting to kind of take a worst case look at all of this. What's with the worst possible conditions? What do these long-term returns look like? And so that's why I choose the lower of the two. Now, I assume you had to pay $90 to buy these boxes. That's a reasonable assumption through the life of this analysis. I only have done this analysis so far up through Throne of Eldraine. I haven't extended it forward into 2020 era boxes and beyond. Eventually, I'll start adding in some of those. Now, I assume you have to pay a 12.5% fee to sell the boxes at the present day. And I don't try to include any shipping costs because I don't know what you'll have to pay to ship in this theoretical analysis where you would be selling these boxes, whether you have a store, whether you use local marketplaces, whether you would sell on TCG Player or eBay or anything else. So I don't include any of that, but I do assume you have to pay a 12.5% fee on the final sale price. So when I did this originally back on November 2nd of 2022, I would take all of the prices in this column, and then given that date in 2022, given the original release date of each box, given the assumed basis, given the fee rate, and all the rest, I would calculate what the compound annual growth rate was on that day. And so, for instance, with this Invasion box released October 2nd, 2000, if you had bought it for $90 on release day, which would be, of course, the worst day to buy something, and you had held it until November 2nd of 2022 and sold it at the then either lower of the market or lowest listed price of $2,000, you would have essentially, after paying the fees, have increased your initial $90 investment by 14.4% per year for that 22 years in between October of 2000 and November of 2022. So it would be a compound annual growth rate of 14.4%. And this is what we're calculating here. So then I came back and I did the same analysis in 2023 with changing the dates and everything correctly, going and looking up the new prices at the time on TCG Player. But I also calculated this 1 year change column, and that's the change from November of 22 prices to November of 23 prices, and I color code them according to whether they are positive or negative changes. And so all I've done now is I've come back, I've done this again on November 5th of 2024. Once again, I've calculated the 1 year change between now 2023 and 2024. So now that you understand what all of this is, what it means, and how to read it, we'll kind of look through some of these results and kind of try to get some ideas about what's going on here. And what you'll notice first off as we scroll down this list, of course, so far I've only shown you through 2005, But even as we scroll down much further, you'll see that most of the boxes have been losing value in the last 2 years. So from November 22 to 23 and 23 to 24, you can see these large drops of value. I mean, just to take just a random box, any of them, Alara Reborn lost 22% of its value between 2022 and 23, and it lost another 19.5% of its value into the next year, 2024. And you can see there are some positives sprinkled in here, but not nearly as numerous as the negatives, as the losers. And as we get further and further down, something else you'll start to notice is that as we get into the mid-2010s, a lot of these compound annual growth rates get very, very small, low single digits, even a couple negative ones here. And of course, that's possible because, again, we're assuming you have to pay a 12.5% fee. And so after you've paid that 12.5% fee, the box is worth, or what's left that you're getting from this hypothetical sale is less than you paid for to start with. And then we come into the closer to the more modern era, like I said, through the 2019 boxes. And I've not gone into the 2020 era yet with this analysis. And you'll see the results have been pretty bad. Now, I think there's at least two things going on. There's two that I think are having some effect here. One is we saw a great surge in prices of everything collectible in 2020 and in 2021. And depending on the particular market for collectibles, whether it was sports cards or Pokemon or Magic or stamps or coins or whatever, they all came down at different times in that era. And so a lot of sports cards started to bottom out around January, February, March of 22. That's when you really saw the market giving back a lot of the gains on big sports card sales that had happened in 2020 and 2021. And so I think part of what's going on here is I bet there was a big drop from 21 into 22. Now, I don't have those data to be able to calculate it. And I think we're seeing a bit of reversion to the mean as we jumped way up in 2020 and 2021. I think we are just giving back a lot of that gain, that unnaturally fast gain. We're giving it back in 22, in 23, and now in 24. Now, eventually, that will stabilize, but reversion to the mean is not something completely unexpected. I mean, famously, go look at a price chart of Zoom stock, the teleconferencing company, and you'll see how during the pandemic, their stock flew up just unreasonably high, as if no one was ever going to leave their home again. And then, of course, the stock gave back most of those gains over the subsequent years, predictably, and it reverted to the mean. Now, there's a second thing that I think is going on here, and as we get, maybe 6 more months out and 12 more months out from today, we might be able to measure it better. And I think that's a lack of interest in the older Magic products. And Rudy has made a number of videos about this, where he talks about essentially old vintage Magic. The market for vintage Magic is just very slow right now. It's not seeing a lot of huge gains. It's not seeing irrational exuberance. It's really, for the most part, it's missing out on the current bull market in Magic. And I think a lot of that is translating here when we're talking about old sealed boxes and seeing a lot of these boxes drop. And, I look at some of these boxes and I think, man, Invasion and Plane Shift for 900 and 1600 and Apocalypse for 1,000 and Odyssey for 1,500. I mean, these look like great prices. I'd love to have some of these boxes just to put on the shelf if I had the kind of money to just put into something that I had no plan to ever sell. 8th edition for $500. We're talking about 20-year-old and 20-plus-year-old boxes for under $1,000, under $2,000. Very few of them over $2,000. Of course, 7th edition is famous for the black border foils, and that's why that one's more expensive. You can take those black border foil cards out of there and grade them and vastly increase their value. But it's very interesting to me, just the opportunities that I see here. You know, if you have a lot of conviction in these old boxes, then probably now's a good time to start slowly buying. I mean, they've been on the downtrend pretty consistently for 2 years now, probably 3 years if we could go back and add the 2021 data. I suspect the pinnacle of the price of most of these boxes was in 2021, especially late 21. And so, you know, if any of these boxes have particular draw to you, either nostalgia wise or because you think they are particularly great and underappreciated box, there are a lot in here that are even 10 plus years old today that are in the $100 to $200 range. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. When will it pay off? Who knows? I mean, you may have to hold these for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years for the price to really kick up hard. And again, there's a lack of interest in old Magic right now, and there's a lack of confidence because of the way WotC is running things and power creeping the game. And so there's not a lot of confidence amongst most people right now that the older cards in these boxes will have any meaningful further appreciation on their own. And thus, there's not a large expectation that there are future gains to be made in the value of these sealed boxes based on the cards inside. And so beyond that, you have to derive the value of these old sealed boxes just from the rarity and collectability of the sealed box itself, not being underpinned at all by the individual cards inside appreciating individually. And so I think there's several kind of, you know, crises in perception of these boxes right now. I don't own any of these old boxes. You know, some of these are kind of cool. I'd like to buy a few, but I'm spending all my money right now growing my inventory in the business, and that's working really well. Inventory that I plan to sell much sooner than I would ever plan to sell any of these old boxes. But, you know, I bet Rudy is buying these right now because he has cash coming out of his ears and he loves these old boxes. And if you're interested in these old boxes and, you know, you'd like to have a shelf full of them, man, now's the time after 2 years of losses. I think eventually these will turn around, though. If there is an element of this price depreciation that is based on lack of confidence in WotC or just general lack of interest in old Magic right now, those two effects will revert to the mean also, but they'll revert to the mean upwards. And so where this hysteria of 2020 and 2021 had a reversion to the mean downwards, those will revert upwards a bit. And I would expect in the long timeline for the overall kind of average view of these boxes to come back up to, you know, 10, 12, maybe 15% compound annual growth rate on the long timeline. Now we can see I took the averages for each time I've taken a snapshot of these boxes. In 2022, the average compound annual growth rate was 12.7. In 2023, it had fallen to 9.6, and now in 2024, it had fallen to 8.2. So in stock market terms, it's mediocre. It's, you know, pretty normal. You don't have to try too hard in the stock market to meet or exceed an 8.2 CAGR. You basically buy an S&P 500 index ETF and you sit on it until you're retired, and you will almost certainly beat that kind of return. But again, I think there's a potential reversion to the mean to the upside on these that will bring them higher in coming years. How high? You know, I really wouldn't expect more than 15%. If it ever got to 18% average, I'd kind of be shocked. You know, these aren't premium products. These aren't collector boxes. These aren't Pokemon where people want to rip them all day long. So it's a different animal in terms of long-term TCG investing. And so finally, I have a chart down here just kind of showing how things look, and I've updated it so that it's looking at CAGR for the current 2024 data. And so it's just in terms of when the sets were released, what is the current compound annual growth rate of the set. I think in a chart like this is useful to try and kind of see, is there some kind of long-term trend? Is there something going on that you may miss looking at the numerical data, but with chart data, you might be able to see something different. And maybe there is. Maybe it's that all the boxes from about 2010 and before are holding at these higher compound annual growth rates just because they are much older boxes. The youngest of these boxes is 14 years old now. And then you kind of get into these other areas. There's certainly a trend here where the compound annual growth rates in the mid 2010s are down in low single digits. So yeah, there's definitely something going on with the expansions from that time, with the print runs, with something about them where the market doesn't particularly like them. So like I said, I'll add more of these sets. Maybe the next time I do this in 6 months, I'll add the 2020 standard booster boxes to this analysis, start picking up pieces of data on them. You have to wait a little while. You have to give them a little while to age for inventories to tighten up a little bit, for you to see at least a little beginning movement on the price of a box so that you know you're really seeing the long-term market's appetite for it. And you're not still seeing the effect of card stores, back rooms all being flooded with the boxes. So that's why I think going through 2019 is probably about right for now. But in the future, I'll certainly increase that. So like I said, I'll be doing this every 6 months from now on. It's on the Kanban board forever. And we'll slowly watch this and we'll see what the trends are over the long timeline. Let me know what you think, or if you have any questions, hit subscribe so you don't miss any updates in the future. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially my very generous supporters on Patreon. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade.